Chapter 23 of the Night Horseman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Night Horseman by Max Brand. Chapter 23. How Max Strann Kept the Law. For when the dog sprang, Max Strann fired, and the wolf was jerked up in the midst of his leap by the tearing impact of the bullet. It was easy for Strann to dodge the beast, and the great black body hurled past him and struck heavily on the floor of the barn. It missed Max Strann, indeed, but it fell at the very feet of Haw Haw Langley, and a splash of blood flirted across his face. He was too terrified to shriek, but fell back against the wall of the barn, gasping. There he saw Black Bart struggle to regain his feet, vainly, for both of the animal's forelegs seemed paralyzed. Now the yellow light of the fire rose brightly, and by it Haw Haw marked the terrible eyes and the lolling, slavering tongue of the great beast, and the fangs like ivory daggers. It could not regain its feet, but it thrust itself forward by convulsive efforts of the hind legs towards Max Strann. Haw Haw Langley stared for a single instant in white-faced fear, but when he realized that Black Bart was helpless as a toothless old dog, the tall cowpuncher twisted his lean fingers with a silent joy. Once more Bart pushed himself towards Max Strann, and then Haw Haw Langley stepped forward and with all the force of his long leg smashed his heavy riding boot into the face of the dog. Black Bart toppled back against the base of the manger, struggled vainly to regain his poise, and it was then that he pointed his nose up and wailed like a lost soul. Wailed with the fury of impotent hate. Max Strann caught Haw Haw by the arm and dragged him back towards the door. "I don't want to kill the dog," he repeated. "Get out of here, Haw Haw. Barry'll be comin' any minute." He could have used no sharper spur to urge on the laggard. Haw Haw Langley raced out of the barn a full stride before Max Strann. They hurried together to the little rise of ground behind which they had left their horses, and as they ran, the scream which had curdled the blood of Randall Byrne rang through the night. In 1,000 years he could never have guessed from what that yell issued. His nearest surmise would have been a score of men screaming in unison under the torture, but Max Strann and Haw Haw Langley knew the sound well enough. When they mounted their saddles they could look over the top of the little hill and observe everything easily without being seen, for the hilltop commanded a range of the corrals and a view of the fronts of the barns and sheds which opened upon the fenced enclosures. The largest and longest of these buildings was now plainly visible, for a long arm of fire reached above the roof on one side of the low shed, and by this growing light the other barns, the glimmering-eyed horses and cattle of the corrals, the trees about the house itself, were in turn visible, though vaguely, and at times, as the flame lapsed, all were lost in a flood of swift darkness. Once more that unhuman shriek echoed from hill to hill and from building to building. It was Satan in his box stall. The flames were eating through the partition, and the stallion was mad with fear. Light flashed here and there. In the big ranch house and from the bunkhouse on the farther side of the corrals rose a volley of curses and yells of dismay. The cattle began milling blindly, bellowing and stamping, and the horses ranged at a mad gallop back and forth across their corrals, wild-eyed with terror. It was like the tumult of a battle, and sharper than a trumpet a new sound cut through the dim. It was a short, high whistle, twice repeated. An answer came from the burning barn, the long, strong neighing of the stallion. "D'you hear?" muttered Max Strann. "It's the hoss talking to his master." "And there he comes," said Haw Haw Langley, "running like the wind." The flame, picked up by the gale, tore for itself a wider breathing space through the roof and sent up an audibly roaring column of blinding red. By that light Max Strann, following Haw Haw's directing arm, saw a lithe figure vault over the fence on the farther side of the corral and dart forward among the milling cattle. Now when cattle begin to mill, it takes a brave man on a brave, well-trained horse to trust his chances in the midst of that ocean of tossing horns. But this man ventured it on foot. Mac Strann could follow him easily, for the man's hat was off and the firelight glittered on his black hair. That glimmering head darted here and there among the circling cattle. Now it was lost, swamped, to all appearances, under a score of trampling hoofs. Again it reappeared on the further side. Mac Strann could see the runner in a comparatively open space, racing like a trained sprinter, and he headed straight towards a wall of tossing horns. They were longhorns, and one sway of those lowered heads could drive the hard, sharp point through and through the body of a man. Yet straight at this impassable wall the stranger rushed, like a warrior in his berserker madness, leaping naked upon a hedge of spears. At the verge of the danger the man sprang high into the air. 2 leaps from back to back among the herd, and he was across the thickest of danger, down once more on the ground, and dodging past the outskirts of the bellowing cows. Over the nearer fence he vaulted, and disappeared into the smoke which vomited from the mouth of the burning barn. "God A'mighty!" groaned Haw Haw Langley. "Can he get the hoss out?" "It ain't possible," answered Mac Strann. "All hosses goes mad when they gets in a fire, even when they sees a fire. Look at them fools over yonder in the corral." Indeed, in the horse corral a score of frantic animals were attempting to leap the high rails in the direction of the burning barn. Their stamping and snorting came volleying up the hill to the watchers. "All hosses go mad," concluded Mac Strann, "and Barry get tramped under the feet of his own hoss, even if he gets to the stall, which he won't. Look there!" Out of the rush of fire and smoke at the door of the barn, Dan Barry stumbled blindly and fell back upon the ground. Haw Haw Langley began to twist his cold hands together in an ecstasy. "The hoss is gone, and the wolf is gone, and Barry is dead," he chuckled to himself. "Mac, I wouldn't have missed this for a 10 days' ride. It's worth it. But see the gal and that new gent, Mac?" For when the clamour arose outside the house, Buck Daniels had run to the window. For many reasons he had not taken off his clothes this night, but had lain down on the bed and folded his hands behind his head to wait. With the first outcry he was at the window, and there he saw the flames curling above the roof of the barn, and next, by that wild light, how Dan Barry raced through the dangerous corral, and then he heard the shrill neighing of Satan and saw Dan disappear in the smoking door of the barn. Fear drew Buck Daniels one way, but a fine impulse drew him another. He turned away from the window with a curse. He turned back to it with a curse, and then muttering, "He went through hell for me, and him and me together will go through hell again," he ran from the room and thundered down the crazy stairs. As he left the house he found Kate Cumberland, and they went on together, running without a word to each other. Only when he came beside her she stopped short and flashed one glance at him. By that glance he knew that she understood why he was there, and that she accepted his sacrifice. They hurried around the outer edge of the corrals, and as they approached the flaming barn from one side, the men from the bunkhouse rushed up from the other. It was Buck Daniels who reached Dan as the latter stumbled back from the door of the barn, surrounded by a following cloud of smoke, and fell stumbling to the ground. And Buck raised him. The girl was instantly beside them. She had thrown on a white dressing gown when she rose from bed. It was girded high across her breast, and over it showered her bright hair, flashing like liquid gold in growing light. She now received the semi-conscious burden of Dan Barry, and Buck Daniels stepped forward, close to the smoke. He began to shout directions which the 2 watchers behind the hill could not hear, though they saw his long arms point and gesticulate, and they could see his speaking lips. But wild confusion was on the crowd of cowpunchers. They ran here and there. 1 or 2 brought buckets of water and tossed the contents uselessly into the swirling, red, stained hell of smoke, but most of the men ran here and there, accomplishing